You've got 5 critical issues facing the planet right now, and these are the 5 C's that I took away right from Eco-Sperity. Obviously, the climate disaster is your first C. The crisis that's going on because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all that's leading to is the second C. China and the U.S. and what's happening in that relationship is the third C. Commodities is the 4th C, and of course that leads to the inflation, and then the 5th C is COVID. So you've got those 5 C's. What's happening as a result of those 5 C's, right, is that countries are now looking at their own dependencies, right, when it comes to commodities, when it comes to their supply chain. And so that's causing a lot of disruption now. And you see that, of course, with Malaysia and chicken, but you see it with, with other countries and wheat and palm oil and all of these other issues where you've got this nationalism now, and that is causing all of these disruptions. So you overlay that, and what that means is that people aren't so worried about the climate crisis right now. They can take a look at that later because they need to look short term at what's going to happen to their population. And we need to get out of that mindset, and we need to keep focused on climate risk. So that's one of the things that was interestingly discussed at Eco-Sperity. And then the other thing that's really hitting hard that's kind of related in Southeast Asia is that you can't delink the environment from the S of ESG, right, or the social perspective, because when you make changes to the environment, you are typically going to be hurting the livelihoods of those people in this part of the world, right? So if you say we're only going to have sustainable palm oil, what happens to all the small shareholder farmers who can't engage in that right now? What's going to happen to their land? What's going to happen to their jobs? What's going to happen to their kids?
Changes can't be made quickly.
Well, they can, except you've got trade-offs. Right. Well, so how are you going to do these trade-offs? And that's the thing, Glenn, that was discussed, right? We're transitioning as a planet now from one energy source, right? Of course, carbon, right, to another energy source, but we haven't thought of how we are going to make this transition smooth. How are we going to make this transition linear? It's impossible to do that. And so there's going to be so much disruption caused. And it's a really interesting way. And I know you guys make fun of my friends at Temasek, right, for saying Eco-Sperity. I mean for saying Eco-Sperity and mashing those two words together. But it's a good way of thinking about it, because how do you address the ecological crisis and keep prosperity when it comes to all the people, especially in this part of the world? Huge challenge. Nothing, of course, was solved over these 3 days. Nothing was ever going to be solved, but it lays out
the issues
and laying out a foundation and a roadmap for how to.
What about nature-sperity or earth-sperity?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I'm just dumbfounded by that. But but on that point, okay,
let's workshop it.
It's wonderful that you're doing this. Of course it is, and it has to be done. But I was meeting with Singaporean friends last night, just like the people listening, and it's all about Glenn's earlier point. Sadly, but honestly, which is bread and butter issues will always dominate for the man in the street. I've been talking to people all week, and all they're interested in, my chicken rice, is it safe? My petrol for my car is too expensive. These are issues that are playing out in Singapore, UK, and US. I was talking to Singaporeans last night. They couldn't believe that my sister and my brother-in-law both have Teslas. They assume that they're multi-millionaires. They're not. It's just that they're much more accessible. Yeah. Now, this is where we get to the awkward part, Steve. We should be driving electric cars now. There should be plant-based alternatives on every menu now. We should be able to charge our cars up easier now. We can't in Singapore, despite being a first world nation, because there are so many other economic and cultural considerations that have to be balanced.
We can't even get people to give up plastic bags from the grocery store and plastic containers for their tapao,
right? Friend, MP, the Louis Ang, has been fighting this for years. So even though what you and Temasek are doing, this is the everyday bread and butter challenge, you know?
But here's the thing about Singapore. Singapore, because it is so wealthy, has not yet been impacted by the climate crisis, right? You don't have flooding here. Why? Because there's so much infrastructure here to make sure the roads don't flood and everything works when it comes to the sewers and the drainage.
We have ponding. We have ponding.
Temporary ponding.
Singapore hasn't had really yet excessive heat, not like you're seeing in places like India, right? Yep. And it hasn't really hit drought yet. So but you know what? The people who are losing their homes and their businesses because of flooding, in Indonesia or Malaysia, because of fires in Australia, people who are dying in India because of the excessive heat now, they are starting to care a lot more, and it is becoming an issue. Singapore is fortunate because it hasn't been impacted by climate risk, in part because it has been so good, right, in putting the infrastructure in place to prevent the extremes from climate risk.
Fortunately, the government has had the money to do that. Right?
And our geographical position helps in terms of tsunami effects and earthquake effects. And so on.
Right.
We're sheltered.
The intensity in storms hasn't really hit here as it is hit in places like the Philippines and others. But Singapore is really starting to be on its front foot and trying to figure out, how are we going to decarbonize our economy? How are we, there's not enough land here for solar. So can we have floating solar, right, platforms as a way to get renewable energy?
So did they come up with any hows? I mean, any suggestions of how we overcome these bread and butter concerns for the bigger picture?
Well, we're now at the point where everybody's coming up with these net zero pledges. We're going to be net zero by 2040, 2050, if you're Indonesia, 2060. How you operationalize that is very, very difficult, and no one has figured that out yet. Some people are at the governmental level, and some governments are saying what we need to do is really put money into technology, figure out how are we going to become more efficient when it comes to energy. And so that's, if you put all that funding in R&D, if you incentivize R&D, if the customers start demanding things, maybe we can get on this pathway to net zero, but it's not going to be smooth and it's not going to be linear.